Hi everyone, are we ready for today's reading lesson? I hope so. So let me share my screen so that you guys can see the PowerPoint. Get rid of you. Everything is in the way. I'm gonna minimize me. All right, so today for our reading lesson, we're doing session 2, and it's called Hey, They Seem as Confused as We Are, Learning Alongside the Main Characters. So the main characters of our fantasy books, sometimes they're learning too, just like we are as the readers. And so you've probably noticed that so far in The Lightning Thief, Percy hasn't got a clue what's going on. He's lived in our world his whole life, and even though he knows some things about Greek mythology from history class, he doesn't know any of it exists in his world. So he has to learn about it. And I've been thinking, this is an author's craft trick. If your main character has to learn about the world, then the reader can learn with that character. So as we're reading, we're learning too. So today's teaching point, readers, today I want to teach you that in complicated stories, like these fantasy novels, the main character sometimes begins without a lot of knowledge, and they have to learn a lot fast. When the main characters are told important information or have new and unfamiliar experiences, readers see those moments in the story as opportunities not only for the characters for learning, I should say, or to learn, but for themselves to learn, hand in hand with the main character. So not only in those moments that they're learning, we're learning something new from the book as well to help us better understand what's going on. So expert fantasy readers recognize when they're confused. Then they say, okay, and pay closer attention when the main character asks questions and how those questions are answered. They also pay close attention when the character has a new learning experience. So let's try it with this passage from our book. This is the scene where Percy overhears Grover and Mr. Brunner talking in Brunner's office. Let's think about what Percy is learning from this conversation. Is the author showing us that Percy is confused and hearing things that don't fit in with his version of the world? So please listen while I read this passage from our book. I'm going to read page 19 and 20. I walked downstairs to the faculty offices. Most of them were dark and empty, but Mr. Brunner's door was ajar. Light from his window stretched across the hallway floor. I was 3 steps from the door handle when I heard voices inside the office. Mr. Brunner asked a question. A voice that was definitely Grover's said, "Worried about Percy, sir." I froze. I'm not usually an eavesdropper, but I dare you to try not listening if you hear when your best friend is talking about you to an adult. I inched closer. "Alone this summer," Grover was saying. "I mean a kindly one, in the school. Now that we know for sure, and they know too." "We would only make matters worse by rushing him," Mr. Brunner said. "We need the boy to mature more." "But he may not have time, the summer solstice deadline." "Will have to be resolved without him, Grover. Let him enjoy his ignorance while he still can." "Sir, he saw her." "His imagination," Mr. Brunner insisted. "The mist over the students and staff will be enough to convince him of that." "Sir, I can't fail in my duties again." Grover's voice was choked with emotion. "You know what they would mean." "You haven't failed, Grover," Mr. Brunner said kindly. "I should have seen her for what she was. Now let's just worry about keeping Percy alive until next fall." The mythology book dropped out of my hand and hit the floor with a thud. Mr. Brunner went silent, my heart hammering. I picked up the book and backed down the hall. A shadow slid across the lighted glass of Brunner's office door, the shadow of something much taller than my wheelchair-bound teacher, holding something that looked suspiciously like an archer's bow. I opened the nearest door and slipped inside. A few seconds later, I heard a slow clop, 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 like muffled wood blocks, then a sound like an animal snuffling right outside my door. A large, dark shape paused in front of the glass, then moved on. A bead of sweat trickled down my neck. Somewhere in the hallway, Mr. Brunner spoke. Nothing, he murmured. My nerves haven't been right since the winter solstice. Mine neither, Grover said. But I could have sworn. Go back to your dorm, Mr. Brunner told him. You've got a long day of exams tomorrow. So I'm going to stop there. So after reading the passage, thinking about what are some questions that the main character might be asking himself? Is he hearing some type of explanation? Or is he eavesdropping on a private conversation? These are all clues that they're learning new information that you should be learning too. In this moment, Percy was eavesdropping on the conversation, and he learned some information, but again, still confused because he's not sure exactly what he heard and trying to make those connections and learning from it. So when a main character has a new experience, such as catching a ballpoint pen that turns into a sword, that's also a clue that they're learning something, and you should be too. All right, so now it's your time to practice this. In your reading today, notice when there's action, when it's slow, when it's mostly conversation. Know that you need to pay close attention to conversations. Anytime the main character asks direct questions, listens to explanations, or has a new experience, these are clues that the character's learning, and you should too. So let's continue reading our fantasy novels and take notes in your reading notebooks that you find on Google Classroom about what you and your characters are learning. So I'll be checking this assignment on Google Classroom that you wrote your notes in your notebook. So please make sure that you do that. You should have been reading a fantasy book since last week from our first lesson, so it should either still be that book that you were reading, or if you've jumped into a new book because you finished that one, but you should be reading fantasy, either a book you have at home, or if you're reading books on Epic, that's perfectly fine. If you have any questions, let me know. And thanks for listening to today's lesson. I'll talk to you guys later.